Wow. Okay. Storm, Force of Nature. Everybody's talking about these Marvel cards. Storm, especially among them. She's super powerful. She hits. She gives a spell Storm. We know that there's a Storm scale in Magic for mechanics from 0 to Storm. Storm is like the high powerest of mechanics. That's what the scale's named after. So, but you could just make many copies of extra turn spells or make many copies of extra combat step spells and things like that. But that is really busted, and nobody's really going to want to play against that for at least not too many times. So it occurred to me, how can we do this deck but make it janky enough that you could play it a lot and not, have your play group just go, no more Storm. It's Storm plus Mill. Let's go. Welcome to the Attic. Mana Dad here. It's the channel where we explore what's fun in Magic, usually on Arena, but as I record this, Storm's not even out in paper. I don't even know if it's going to come to Arena. I haven't seen them announce that yet. Hopefully it will. If it is, subscribe to the channel. We can play it in Brawl, I guess. But right now, this is a Commander deck tech, and one of the most challenging things to do in Commander is win with Mill. But we do have the busted Storm, so let me just read it out for you in case you haven't seen it. Storm is a 3/4 flying vigilance mutant hero, and whenever she deals combat damage to a player, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn has Storm, which, if you recall, means when you cast it, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Okay, so Storm. If you haven't played with it, it's super fun. It's super challenging, and it is going to be extra challenging because we can't get the Storm unless we deal combat damage to a player. So we've got a number of ways to deal with that. First of all, one board wipe here. I was just looking for board wipes that have like, a mill component to them or something that's going to work nicely with Storm. So first of all, we have destroy target artifact, create 4 treasure tokens. So anytime we can build up a big pool of mana to use on our Storm turn, that's going to be good. So that's one possible use of Megaton's Fate. Or the detonate option, it deals 8 damage to each creature, so it's board wipe. And each player gets 4 rad counters. And if you don't remember the whole rad counter mechanic, essentially they have the counters, then on their the beginning of their next main phase, they're going to mill, in this case 4. And anytime they hit a non-land, they're going to take a damage and remove a rad counter. So it's probably going to mill more than 4 on average, maybe like 5, 6 cards. But if we Storm that, if we copy it, we can deal like 16, whatever, a ton of damage, put a ton of rad counters on our opponents. Hopefully by the time it gets around to us, they've milled out or come close, and that would be a really weird but fun way to win with that. But that's kind of our only board wipe in the deck. So not playing a ton of board wipes with this design. You can modify it how you like. If you have, Cyclonic Rift or whatever, go ahead. I've done this more on a budget. I know it's $403.63. It's estimating. Probably will be more once you add in like the Storm cards and things, but so it goes. Aurora Borealis, or Manamorphose, is the magic name. So it's a reprint of Manamorphose with a Storm flavor here. Add 2 mana in any combination of colors, draw a card. Classic Storm card. Basically, you can see we have 23 cantrips, what I'm classifying as cantrips in this deck. And so that's stuff that's just going to either refund our mana or refund us the card and up our Storm count. So we're going to hopefully be able to cast a bunch of cheap spells and then cast a big mill spell at the end for the finish. So what are the cheap spells? What are the cantrips? We've got Aurora Borealis. Say that 5 times fast. Manamorphose. Enter the Enigma, relatively new card here from Duskborn. 1 mana. Storm can't be blocked. Draw a card. Perfect for Storm. Founding the Third Path is going to let us cast an instant or sorcery mana value 1 or 2 from our hand without paying its mana cost. So essentially for 2 mana, we get 2 spells, and potentially even 3 because Chapter 3, which we can skip ahead to, is exile target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard. Copy it, you may cast the copy. So a little bit of a storm enabler here. It's also got a mill in Chapter 2. So Founding of the Third Path does it all. Very few enchantments in this deck, but this is one of them. Might of the Meek. Another way we can make sure to deal combat damage is to give Storm Trample. This gives Trample. If we somehow control a mouse, which I don't believe there is one in the deck, it gets a +1/+0. Repeal, this will let us bounce, hopefully if there's one blocker on one opponent. We just need to get through on whatever the weakest opponent is. So we can bounce something, or we can bounce a token, so return target non-land permanent with mana value X to its owner's hand. So just for 1 blue, bounce your opponent's treasure token or food token or what have you, draw a card for 1 blue. Rosethorn Acolyte, adventure cards, you're going to see a bunch of those in this deck because they allow you to get 2 spells on 1 card. Seasonal Ritual is what it says. We're gonna pay 1 mana, get a mana, up our storm count by 1. We can also just play the Rosethorn Acolyte as a mana dork, and that will help ramp us and let us play more spells per turn. Slip Through Space, another can't be blocked, draw a card. Mishra's Command. This is another one that just kind of does it all. It is sorcery speed, but we get to choose 2. So we can choose target player, discard up to X cards. They draw a card for each card discarded this way. So we can use that to just get cards out of our hand that we don't need. Go find our mill payoffs. We can use it to deal damage to a creature, deal damage to a planeswalker, or we can give something +X+0 and haste. And of course, playing Storm when we have 5 mana and being able to give it haste so opponents are not expecting to get an attack and not prepared for it and hopefully tapped out is going to be a great way to sneak through and get our Storm in and get that hit and double up a spell. Maybe when we have 6 mana at least, because we want to be able to cast a spell after it. Any of these cantrip spells, if we cast Storm, cast Mishra's Command to give haste, and then cast Charge Through after Storm hits, it's gonna duplicate the Charge Through. We're gonna draw a bunch of cards for 1 mana. So still pretty good. This is just trample, draw a card. And I did try to not make it all blue instance. You can just, if you wanted, you could just do all blue instance that 1 mana draw you a card. There are a lot of those, and maybe we'll talk about that at the end of the deck tech. Expedite, haste, draw a card. Faithless Looting, draw 2, discard 2, but then you got the flashback ability. So just kind of loot us through the deck, up that storm count, strike it rich, 1 red mana, create a treasure token. Again, up that storm count, and with the flashback ability, so we can start stacking up treasures if we want. Frantic Search, cost 3 mana, draw 2, discard 2. So we're going to shape our hand and then untap up to 3 lands. So just perfect discount there. Thought Scour, target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, draw a card. So mill plus cantrip, had to put that in there. Land Grant, you can actually cast for free. So as long as you have no land cards in your hand, just reveal it, cast it for free, go get a forest. And if you haven't played to land that turn, put the forest down. You've spent 0 mana to get a mana and up your storm count. Consider, surveil 1, draw a card. Pretty classic. Overmaster, I thought I'd throw this one in. If you do, I wouldn't put this in a meta where your opponents aren't running counter spells. But if you are in a meta where people run counter spells, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn can't be countered, draw a card. Perfect. You play this before you hit with Storm because it's a sorcery. And then Bob's your uncle for the big Storm payoff after that. Preordain, scry 2, draw a card. Shadow Rift, give something shadow, draw a card. Crop Rotation, many people maybe don't think of this, but you basically tap your green source, sacrifice it, go get a green source, comes in untapped. So you can just get up your storm count for 1. You can also let us tutor up whatever the best land in the deck is. I don't have Gaia's Cradle, but if you do, Crop Rotation, definitely put it in. Gitaxian Probe, look at target player's hand, draw a card. The great thing about the Phyrexian mana here is you don't have to pay any mana. So this is 0 mana, draw a card, up the storm count. And there's one more in the deck, which we'll get to, that's like that. Crimson Wisps, becomes red, not relevant. Gains haste, draw a card, perfect. Visions of Beyond, this is a rather obscure card, although it does cost about $13, it looks like. If a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, draw 3. So Ancestral Recall, legal in Commander as Visions of Beyond in your mill deck. And sometimes opponents will put 20 cards in their graveyard without you even having to help them, so that's pretty cool. We don't need a lot of draw in this deck because we have all these cantrips, but I do have stuff like Hearth Elemental, again, an adventure, discard your hand, draw 2 cards, so once we get empty-handed, play this, we're going to get 2 cards out of it, and it's going to cost X less to cast, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard that are instants, sorceries, or have an adventure. Very often, I think we will probably be able to cast this for 1 red. So again, 1 mana, up the storm count by 1. It's going to be pretty good. Land Grant, we talked about. Archmage Emeritus. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So it's just going to double up the draws on all of these cards. That's going to be great. Seagate Restoration, it's a land. It's also a draw spell. If we somehow gave this Storm, it's going to be ridiculous because it's going to copy, let's say we copied it 3 times and we have 4 cards in hand. So then we draw 4 cards, and then the next one we draw 8 cards, and then the next one we draw 16 cards, and we have no maximum hand size. I can't wait to try to pull that off with Storm. That's going to be hilarious. Couple other ways to give Storm Evasion. I did put an Access Tunnel. It's kind of bad. You're going to be using up 4 of your mana to get Storm through, but maybe in a pinch, if you have a lot of mana, it's going to be useful. This is one I want to play with and see how it is. Another one is a pet card of mine. A lot of people don't know this. Relatively cheap old card that's never gotten a reprinting. False Orders. I use this in my Calamax Storm deck, and it plays really well. You decide whether and how 1 defending creature blocks. You can't make a choice the defender couldn't legally make, and you play after the defender has chosen defense, but before damage is dealt. And let's see, do we have the Scryfall version of that? Well, I didn't prepare for that, but essentially, they think they block Storm. You False Orders, they haven't blocked Storm. You just remove the blocker they put in front of Storm. Do it, when there's only 1 blocker. And Storm gets through, and Bob's your uncle. Mana base, not much to say here other than we're running a ton of these MDFCs that come in untapped because we want to be able to, storm off, essentially. And other than that, we do have Triumph, which is tapped. We have a lot of things that are going to pull forests out, so pay attention. We have Hedge Maze, which does come into play tapped. But pay attention to these cards down here in the ramp section that say search your library for a forest. Now the mill section. Mill. Bond of Insight. I thought this would be fun. This is going to mill each player 4 cards. If we storm it, it's going to be a lot of mill. And each time we're going to return up to 2 instant or sorcery cards from our graveyard to our hand. So I also have a little recursion section, but this is one of the recursion spells that's going to, if we somehow lose one of our spells or already cast one of our spells, want to bring it back and storm it again, Bond of Insight is going to be one that lets us do that. Another really obscure card that I was happy to have found when I was searching for this deck is Book Burning. All right, so unless a player has Book Burning, deal 6 damage to him or her, put the top 6 cards of target player's library into his or her graveyard. So you are going to probably want to target a specific player with this and make sure you're storming this. But if you are, at a certain point, they're going to be milling themselves, whatever. They don't want to take the 6 damage. At a certain point, they're going to have so few cards in their library that they are going to have to take the 6 damage. So you can actually win with damage with Book Burning with red and mill people out. You can either mill or burn them out, but I call it a mill kill. I'd say it's a mill kill. Here's another obscure one, but it made the cut. Dreadwaters. Target player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of lands you control. Well, we have a bunch of ramp spells, as you'll see in a minute. We're going to hopefully have a ton of lands on the graveyard. We can storm this and just mill, and we can target a bunch of players because each storm copy, you can target a different player. We could win the game with Dreadwaters, and 4 mana is doable, especially if you have a bunch of lands. Another weird one that came up, we're talking about rad counters earlier. This is the only other rad counter one, but when it deals combat damage to a player, they get 4 rad counters, so it does have a mill angle. But what's cool about this, it's 2/2 Death Touch, so it's a great blocker, just holds down the ground. And whenever a player mills a non-land card, you gain 1 life. Well, we're hopefully going to be milling, you know, 10s, 20s, dozens of cards from our opponents. So this could gain us a bunch of life, keep us in the game long enough to get that mill kill, because we're talking about libraries that are 99 cards that we have to get through. Megaton's Fate, we talked about that in terms of the mill. Psychic Spiral, there's always the danger we're going to run out of cards because we got so many cantrips here. What's fun about this, shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. Target player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So let's say we have 30 cards in our graveyard. We zoop, put that back in, shuffle those back in, and mill somebody for 30 for 5 mana. And if it's got Storm, we can mill a bunch of people for 30, 40, whatever it is. And also keep ourselves from milling out, which is a distinct possibility. So we at least got one little protection of that. Thought Scour, we talked about that. Cantrip mill. Sorceress Squall, this is another one I thought would be fun. It's really, it says it's 9 mana, but it has Delve, and we're going to have all those cantrips in the graveyard. So theoretically, 3 blue mana, target opponent mills 9 cards. Then you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. And well, it's Commander. Everybody's going to have absurd instants and sorceries in their graveyard. They can't blame you. They were playing them. You know, Cyclonic Rift from their graveyard, and if that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So it's another way actually to get stuff out of the graveyard if they have like flashback or whatever. Get stuff out of the graveyard, and we have another way to deal with in case we accidentally mill over something opponent wants in their graveyard. We can handle that. Maddening Cacophony is very efficient. 2 mana. This is a great one. If we don't have a ton of mana, but we've cast a couple cantrips, 2 mana, each opponent mills 8 cards. So it's an each opponent. So if we stack up, I don't know how many of those, 4 of those, all of a sudden you're talking about some real serious mill here. Also has a kicker option where each opponent mills half their library, rounded up, which is not bad. Do that the turn before you do the big mill, and you probably can win the next turn. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, not mill, it's exile, but each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled cards with total mana value 20 or more. Not as strong in Commander as it is in Constructed, where everybody's trying to run like 1s and 2 drops, but still, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, 3 mana, big mill, could win us the game, and the exile is not bad. All right, here's our biggest payoff right here. Brain Freeze. If you don't know this one, this is a classic. There are combos that have to deal with it. I'm not running combo necessarily in this deck. We're just trying to do janky mill stuff. But you could do stuff with like, what is it, Lion's Eye Diamond, and the red card that lets you play Escape from the graveyard. Is it Through the Breach? No, that's a different card. But anyways, you can look up the combos if you're a combo person and your group likes combo. But essentially, there is a non-deterministic combo with this, which is we just play a bunch of cantrips, we Brain Freeze, Storm stacks. So if our Storm creature hits and gives Brain Freeze Storm, it's going to storm on top of storm, and we can mill quite a bit. It's only 3 cards per instance of the spell, but because of the storm thing, it could be a lot. And Bruvek, the Grandiloquent, probably the most expensive card I have in this build of the deck. We can talk about some cards you can put in that are even more expensive, but if you're building a mill deck in Commander, it's highly recommended. Throw a Bruvek in there. Just doubling up all your mill. It's pretty good. Doesn't work with Tasha's Hideous Laughter, but Bruvek works with everything else in the deck. So not too many mill payoffs, because more often we want to just churn through the deck with the cantrips and then hit one of these big spells, give it Storm, and that's how we win. We're also going to want ways to protect Storm. I don't have a ton of those. Depending on how much removal is in your meta, you might want more, but they do have a Marvel-themed Heroic Intervention coming out, so threw that in there. Wild Shape can give Trample, or it can give Hexproof, so it's kind of got a double duty. This gives Trample, Hexproof, Indestructible, and +3/+3, so Overprotect kind of covers all your bases. It is 2 mana instead of 1 mana, but still, up your Storm count, whatever, protect, pretty good. Swiftfoot Boots, hexproof and haste. Great to, give Storm, comes in, attacks, hits, get your Storm trigger. Gotta love the boots. Earth's Mightiest Emblem is the Marvel-themed version of Arcane Signet. Add 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity. There's a Marvel-themed Soul Ring, so I put that in. Mana-positive rocks are great for Storm. Soul Ring comes down, taps for more mana than you spent on it. It's fantastic. This taps for 1 less mana than you spent on it, but you can still tap it for mana the turn it comes down, so that's great for storming. Beanstalk Giant, this is our adventure here. Important to note, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Doesn't come onto the battlefield tap, so you can do the Fertile Footsteps and still play a cantrip off of that, get your storm count up. Growth Spiral, if we're drawing a bunch of cards with these cantrips, we're going to end up with more lands than we have land drops, so Growth Spiral and Explore are going to help us out with that. Growth Spiral is at instant speed, Explore is at sorcery speed. Dire Strain Rampage we can use to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or a land. Probably destroy our own land, because if a land was destroyed this way, we can search for up to 2 basic lands. They do come in tapped, and then we can ramp. It has flashback, so we can do it again. Goblin Anarchomancer, one of the few creatures in the deck, but a classic Storm card at common from Modern Horizons 2, I believe. Each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. And we have a lot of red and green spells. Something like Elemental Resonance. Enchant permanent, doesn't have to be your own permanent. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add mana equal to enchanted permanent's mana cost to your mana pool. Mana cost includes color. So your opponent plays that big 7 mana, whatever. You enchant it, and next turn, you're getting that 7 mana, and you can have a huge storm turn. Harrow. This will let us, we have sacrifice a land to cast it. It is instant speed. We can search our library for up to 2 basic land cards, then put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Again, not coming in tapped. If you storm this, you only have to do the sacrifice the 1 land, and then you're just getting 2 basic lands for each copy. So great little use of storm. Utopia Sprawl, 1 mana, enchants a forest. So make sure you have a forest, but if you do, it's 1 mana ramp, and it's great with Frantic Search. Untap that land. You can tap for 2 with it, so you can actually use Frantic Search to ramp. Spell Swindle. Don't have a lot of ways to deal with opponents. Aren't planning on holding up too much mana during opponents' turns, but the turn before our big storm turn, if we can catch opponent playing a big spell swindle it, turn that into artifacts for us. We're going to be in great position. Stormkill Artist, similarly, as we're casting all these cantrips, if we're getting a treasure, and it also triggers on copies, so it's going to trigger on the storm copies. Stormkill Artist is just ridiculous in this deck. Opponents would be wise to remove it immediately. You saw the ramp, Tireless Provisioner. Every time a land enters, we're probably just going to make a treasure token, maybe a food token if our life total is low. Nature's Lore, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, not tapped, then shuffle. 3 visits, search your library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, not tapped, then shuffle. Carpet of Flowers, again, based on your meta, but if you do have blue players, Carpet of Flowers, great 1 mana ramp. At the beginning of each of your main phases, you get X mana, where X is the number of islands target opponent controls. 1 or 2 islands, we got 2 islands, that's 4 mana every turn. The first main phase and the second main phase, so pretty ridiculous. Bear Umbra can also protect Storm because it has Totem Armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this armor. I think Totem Armor has been changed to Umbra Armor. In any case, it's sort of like a regenerate. You're going to have to lose the Bear Armor, but at least it gets Storm through. And if Storm does connect with Bear Armor on, we get to untap all our lands. So that's going to be perfect for a big Storm turn. Play a couple spells, make Storm unblockable, hit, untap all the land, and then play some big mill spell, hopefully, and win. Also in the recursion category, so we talked about Bond of Insight, but we have Noxious Revival, which is essentially a free spell. Again, great just to up a storm count. There's so many uses for this. If opponent's about to play something from their graveyard or what have you, you can put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. There's a lot of like CEDH type tricks people do with Noxious Revival, but in the end, it can just be pay 2 life, up our storm count by 1, and that's great. Or bring back, a spell, put it on top of our library, and then draw it with a cantrip and play it. That kind of stuff. Removal. We have repeal. I think we talked about that. Dire Strain Rampage. I mean, basically all the removal here, except for Ghost Vacuum, is doing double duty. So I mentioned before, we need some way to deal with cards in opponent's graveyard that we don't want there after we've milled them. Well, Ghost Vacuum is a new card from Duskmourn that's really fun. Each turn we're going to be able to exile a card from a graveyard. As long as it's a creature, at some point we can pay 6 tap, sacrifice Ghost Vacuum, and put each creature card exiled with the vacuum onto the battlefield under control with a flying counter on it. Each is a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types. Activate only as a sorcery. I don't know if you played with this card. It's a lot of fun. In Commander, like every creature has an ETB, so all the creatures are value as you're sucking them up from the graveyard with the Ghost Vacuum throughout the game. At some point, 6 mana, sacrifice it and get some kind of huge, big turn that might lead to a big storm win. We talked about Storm Killing Artist and Brain Freeze as particular storm cards, but I just had put them in a little storm category. And then finally, I'm not big on tutors, and my play group is not big on tutors, but just with Storm, being able to tutor a card into your hand ups the storm count and will let us get a specific thing. So we can Merchant Scroll for the Brain Freeze or solve the equation for the Brain Freeze pre-combat. It's also not terrible if you give one of these Storm and just start pulling out instants and sorceries out of your deck and fill up your hand. So I think they're both uncommons, I believe. They're not too expensive. As far as tutors go, they're not the most powerful tutors. They're not like, Demonic Tutor or what have you. So I think they're relatively fair, but if you don't feel like tutors are worth it, we have enough, draw and churning through our deck to find the cards that we need eventually. You don't necessarily need them. You could put in more cantrips or something from there. So that is the Storm Mill deck. Leave your questions and your suggestions for things that I missed in the comments. And also let me know, because this is kind of an atypical video for this channel, but if you like stuff like this, I can maybe make more of it. I do play Commander. I do design Commander decks, but I mostly focus the channel on Arena. And a lot of times I'm designing Arena Brawl decks that also work in Commander, so they do double duty. So if you like that kind of thing, hit that subscribe. And with that, this is Mana Dad reminding you that Magic is a game so fun, even dads can enjoy it. Adios.